approved. Now we come to the public participation portion of the meeting. If anyone would like to come up and speak to the board, please come up, state your name, give your address, and you have 3 minutes to talk. Well, I'll give you 5.
I'm used to a bigger crowd. My name is Barry Cleveland. I live at 1435 McPherson Avenue, Council Bluffs. And Mr. Arthur and board, I'm presenting for the board's consideration a petition signed by 332 district-eligible voters requesting the Council Bluffs Community School District board call a special election on September 11th, 2018, asking district residents to consider a $37 million general obligation bond for the purpose of remodeling Kern and Wilson middle schools. May I bring these forward?
You may.
Sir?
Stand up for them. Thank you. I have received the petition.
May I be seated?
You may. Thank you, sir.
Before he goes, I would like to thank Mr. Cleveland for his part and role in this and for the work that he does in our community.
Well, thank you very much, but it wasn't just me. There were many other volunteers that helped put this all together. So
Great. Thank you so much.
Let's say you're a great servant of the area, though. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Barry.
Okay, so we received this petition, and it's been inspected to make sure we have the correct number, and we will be taking this up later on in the meeting. Now I move on to the student achievement portion of the meeting. Well, it says student achievement on my little tiny agenda. A superintendent's report would be great. So,
Okay, here's your
thank you, ma'am.
laptop.
Yeah.
At this time, before we have Dr. Borthman is going to present on our NWEA map assessment update and our 2017-2020 academic plan. But before he does, I'd like to ask Mr. Milbourne to stand for me. I want to thank him for his time this summer. Mr. Milbourne, as you all know, is one of our fine principals that serves at Longfellow. And this summer, he served as an interim HR director for me. He'll be returning back to his building on the 30th. So I just wanted to thank you for your leadership and for helping us through this process and this time and transition. And I'm very proud of the work you did.
Nice. Thank you, sir.
With that, Dr. Borthman, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, board. It's my pleasure to provide for you tonight some information regarding our spring assessment of the measures of academic progress, better known as NWEA MAP assessment. I provided a brief overview in your packet, but wanted to spend some time tonight digging a little bit deeper into some specific results that we were able to attain in our spring administration, as well as give you an overview of the types of reports that both our students, parents, teachers, and district administrators are able to use as we use the MAP test to help us improve academic achievement in the district. So I wanted to start tonight by creating some common language along with board members, because in the future, as we continue to use the MAP to set goals and look at how students are making progress over time, we're going to be bringing you really 2 sets of data points that we will be tracking over time. And these are the 2 points that are listed on the screen for you tonight. The first is what we're going to talk about as MAP performance. So looking at the percentage of our students that are scoring in the average, and high bands of NWEA MAP. And if you think about that in terms of how we have looked at other norm referenced measures, 41 to 60 percentile is about the middle part of where most students would score. That's what is considered the average band. 61 to 80 percentile would be the high average band, and 81 percentile and above would be the high average band. So what we're trying to do is track the number of students who continually, or in our school district, that can demonstrate academic success from the 41st percentile and above. Secondly, and I would argue as equally important, if not more important, it's the number of students who are showing growth. are they able to make achievement gains year after year after year and continue to grow and make progress? And that's what we're going to refer to as MAP growth. And the MAP test will allow us to work with students to set individual learning goals, to track progress, and to monitor their growth versus what NWEA says students like them should be growing. So we're not able to also see their growth, but also are they staying on pace with their peers in terms of growth. So I want to provide with you tonight some early snapshots of the MAP performance data. And remember, this is our very first administration. So we were anticipating that when we went into this administration that results could be a little bit lower than what we are typically accustomed to. Obviously, that can be attributed to a lot of different factors. But the primary one is this is a 100% computer-based assessment. So this is the first time that our students have actually sat down independently and taking a computer-based assessment from K through 11. Our high school students have a little bit more experience with that, but especially at our primary and elementary grades, that's a very new concept to our students. Secondly, this is an individually paced assessment, which we found in some anecdotal feedback from our early pilot teachers. Students were very uncomfortable with that because not all students finish at the same time. So the computer adapts the test based on how many answers the student answers correctly or incorrectly to find their level. And it's looking for what's called the standard error of measurement. So how close can we get to predicting that we're pretty sure where their level is going to be based on how many questions they answer correctly or incorrectly. For some students, that may be 10 minutes. For other students, it may be 40. And so the longer it takes them, the more variance there is in their score, the more unpredictable their score is, because that's telling us that they're answering some correct, and then some incorrect, and then some correct, and some incorrect.
So is that because they aren't consistent in their error,
That
or
is
versus?
correct.
Okay.
Or they maybe have strengths in one particular area of math and maybe have a weakness in another area of math. And it's trying to find their level, and I'll show you some reports that point that out here later. So that was a new experience for our students. They're used to a timed environment where, like the Iowa assessment, where they kind of pace themselves over a course of 20 or 30 or 40 items. But this has an opportunity for students really to key in on what their own present level is. So in mathematics, we saw some variance across the school district. This represents the percentage of students who scored at average, high average, and high. And the score ranges were from third grade and sixth grade, which were two of our lowest areas, which were about 43%, all the way to a high of second grade, which was 59%. Reading was a much different story. You can see the scores are much higher in reading. We attribute that to the fact that we have spent a bulk of our time and energy working on fluency, working on implementation of wonders in grades K through 6, and really trying to make sure that we had a firm foundation at the primary levels, and working with our curriculum specialists and teacher leaders to make sure that we had strong curriculum at our high school levels as well. And so this is what we would kind of like to see happen. We would like to see that continuous trend line of growth from year after year after year. And I might note that if you look at 11th grade, they were almost our next to highest performer at 65%, which, if you remember, I said that there's a huge flaw in the 11th grade Iowa assessment test. There's no way that we dive 20% from 10th to 11th. MAP confirms that, and when it comes to reading, our 11th graders did not just bomb the test. There is absolutely something wrong with the Iowa assessment test at 11th grade, and this helps prove that point. So I want to spend a little bit of time tonight making this a little bit more personal. Oftentimes we share a lot of data with board members, and we're going to talk data tonight. We're also going to talk about district averages and means and RIT scores. But I want to come back to the point of why we do this work. And this is about kids. Every one of these data points are the picture of a child that's sitting in our classroom, a child that performs on the athletic field or in the fine arts performing area. We're doing this work, we're collecting this data, not just for the sake of having more information, but to help us do a better job to serve the kids that we have. And so I'm going to talk tonight from the perspective of a district administrator who uses this data to make decisions, but also as a parent who has a student who is a second grader at Lewis and Clark Elementary and took the MAP test twice this year. He was lucky enough to have a classroom where his teacher was an early implementer and a pilot teacher, so he has 2 data points. And to be able to show you what that means, both from a practitioner point of view and from a parent consumption point of view. So this is Sutton. He likes math, presidential facts, farming, and baseball. So when we think about this at the absolute highest level, and I've been given permission to move tonight because I'm hooked up, so I'm going to try to point some of these things out on the screen so hopefully it makes a little bit more sense to you. But when we look at this data from the district level, what we can see is we can get data that shows us by every grade level and by administration term how well students are doing based on an average score. So in earlier presentations I talked about the Roush unit, the RIT unit. That is a standardized scale score that just tells us on a continuous set of numbers how kids fall from kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade. And we can use that consistent interval to help us make predictions over time about how kids will perform. So we're able to see over time, on an average, are we getting better? Are students increasing by cohort? Are they increasing from year to year by grade level? And we can look at that not only within math and reading, but we can look at it within subtests within math and reading. So for example, here is the K through 2 math mean scores and how much variance there was, how far students were from one standard deviation to the other, how big the spread was. And we can look at that in terms of the 4 domains of mathematics to see where we have strengths and weaknesses in our curriculum. If we drill down one step lower, we can get data on specific schools. So here's a specific school report for Lewis and Clark Elementary that shows K through 5, how well students did, same math test. We can see how they compared to other grade levels within the school district, but they can also see how they did from one test administration to another. Did they see growth in their from winter to spring within second grade? And then we can drill down one step deeper, and we can drill into second grade as a whole. So at second grade at Lewis and Clark, they can see how they performed when they compare themselves to the district, what was their average score versus the district's average score. And then they can also look and see how students scored in terms of levels. Where were students at in terms of when we talk about the top 3 band? For example, at Lewis and Clark, 73% of the students were in the high, and average bands. That's a very respectable score. That's kind of what we would expect to see between 70 and 80% of our kids scoring in the 41st percentile and above. We can drill down one step deeper. We can go to an individual classroom at Lewis and Clark. And these are all of the young people that were in Sutton's class this year. And in his class, you can see that they had 72% of their students in their classroom scored at an average or higher level, and they were really, really high in measurement and data. They must have spent a lot of time on measurement and data because the kids were really, really strong. 61% of their kids scored at the 80th percentile or above in measurement. So they've really done some good things, probably an opportunity for other people to learn what is that teacher doing with regard to measurement. Something really worked in that classroom. You can contrast that with geometry. It's an area where we have to improve. Interestingly, we know in second grade, geometry comes at the very end of the school year. So these are data points that we can use to help us look at curriculum, look at instructional practices, and look at individual needs of students, which is the next layer down. So Dr. Shudak kind of gave you a rough idea of what this looks like in his last presentation, but I wanted to bring it back again because I think it really highlights some of the power. Because sometimes a single data point, like the average score, doesn't tell the whole picture of student achievement. And this is a great example of this. So what this quadrant does is it tells us how high are students achieving on the bottom from left to right, and how much growth are they making from bottom to top in a year. So we would want to see our students achieving somewhere to the right of the 41st percentile, so average, or high, and at least meeting 50% growth. That means 50% of our kids meeting their expected growth on the assessment. So if NWEA says that Sutton should grow 5 points, if he doesn't grow 5 points, he doesn't hit the 50th percentile. Okay? So let me dig in a little bit deeper. Here's an individual student score report. This is Sutton's score report for mathematics. So what this tells us from an individual student perspective is that Sutton scored a 202. That was his RIT score. That's green because that means he scored in the high average. So he's between average and high. That's where he scored in comparison to his peers. That's about the 77th percentile. What we found out about that is that, like I told you before, in his class, and Sutton as well, he scored a 202. That only tells part of the story. He didn't do real hot in geometry. He was a 187. 187 in numbers and operations. NWA has already identified this is an area where he needs additional support to focus. But he is really strong at measurement and data and algebraic thinking, 202. That's a really high score. So they give us a snapshot up here that says he does a really good job at these two areas. He needs to work in this area. Overall, he's scoring much better than his peers nationally. But what I like even more is that it provides a projection. It will tell us how likely that student is to perform on the Iowa assessment, and how they will perform likely on the ACT. So we can start making early predictors of what students need to do to improve performance on some of those high-stakes college and career measures like ACT and our new state assessment. Remember I told you those 4 boxes told the whole story? So Sutton scored at the 23rd percentile on growth. So what does that mean for him? That means that he is down here in the yellow box. It means he came in achieving high, left achieving high, but didn't make a lot of gains last year from winter to spring. His projected growth from winter to spring was 4. He should have grown 4 points. He grew 1. So he wasn't making enough growth. He had more potential that he wasn't able to demonstrate. And the reason I want to emphasize this is because it helps us look at all different types of students. Most likely, as a parent, I would say, well, yeah, he's doing well. He's above average, right? But he's not working up to his potential. And as I dig a little bit deeper in the data as a parent, I can see it took him 13 minutes to complete the math test and 10 minutes to complete the reading test. He breezed through that sucker as fast as he could because he wanted to get done. He knows more than what he put on here, and the map test tells us that. He did not make as much growth as he should have. So this is a great opportunity for instructional decisions to go back, look at the student data, look at this report, which is the Learning Continuum report, that says, with regard to students who score 181 to 190 in geometry, like Sutton did, he really needs to work on these 3 things. And you can group him with student number 5 and student number 6 because they have the same needs. Okay? Over time, the student summary report also allows us to track how is Sutton doing. Remember I said he was kind of flat in terms of achievement? If he stays on that trajectory, you can see where he's going to end up. He's going to continue to probably be above average, but if he doesn't continue to make growth, his peers are going to pass him. And as the score gets higher and higher to stay in that above average band, if he doesn't grow along with that, he'll get left behind. This also allows us to see where average achievement is in the school district. So this line shows what the average is. So it's right in the average band, which we would hope that if our achievement were in the orange, green, or blue bands, we would be on track. We would be shooting where the rest of the nation is right now in terms of academic achievement in those areas. It will also tell us, based on these bands, where Iowa assessment, where we would predict them to see Iowa assessment. When we have a new Iowa assessment, there'll be a line in here that says, here's the average Iowa assessment score. So parents will be able to see that data point in real time, 3 checkpoints a year to help monitor progress of students. The other thing I want you to note about this chart is it really helps us see some clear patterns. Because when we have 3 dipsticks over time, we can make really educated decisions about not just a single test in May, but can we measure annual progress of students and report back to the board, how are kids doing? Are we making progress or are we not? So the last piece that I want to share with you tonight is digging down one step deeper, and that's to actual individual conversations with kids. Conversations that happen between teachers and students and parents and students. This is around goal setting. And remember I said that Sutton didn't make his goal. He should have grown 4 points and he grew 1. Well, this report helps us see that what Sutton should be shooting for the fall of 2018 is a 206 in math and a 204 in reading. So he has a new goal. And like I identified before, geometry, way below. It's an area of concern for him. It's an area that his teacher and he need to work on next year. Same way with reading, was a little bit less conclusive, but he has some growth areas in literature and informational text for next year. So this allows a student to set a goal. They can say, I want to grow 4 points, 6 points. They tell us here, you should grow 3 here and you should grow 4 here. So they can set an attainable goal and then write an action plan. What are they really going to do to be able to get to that? How can families and teachers work together to help students reach toward that goal and monitor progress in real time? So what's next? We've started some initial training. We have a cohort of about 50 teachers that have helped us kind of fine-tune the process as we went along. They will actually be teaching other teachers this summer, along with folks from NWEA, on how to use the reports, access them, help set goals, look at trends over time, identify gaps in their instruction. And that will take place at our summer academy the 3rd week in August at the Mid-America Center. And that's the required professional development this year for all teachers, K through 12. And then this fall, we will administer the MAP test again in the month of November, and then we will bring back to the board our dipstick of fall 2018 based on performance only. And the reason we will only bring performance data back in the fall is we don't have an indicator to show growth because you can't measure from spring to fall. We can't measure what happened over the summer, okay? Then in February, we'll administer the winter results, and after that, we'll bring you performance data, and then we'll also bring you fall to winter growth data. And then in the spring of 2019 is kind of the grand reveal of all, because we get to bring performance data back for the whole year, and then we get to also see growth over the whole entire year. We get to see fall to spring. So how did we do over the whole entire year? We get to see winter to spring, so we get another snapshot of a third of the year, and then we get to see how well kids did from one grade level to the next. So we're excited to be able to have these data points to be able to help inform instruction, help parents and families monitor their students' progress, and help us as administrators in the Board of Education help continue to push us forward to make sure that we're maximizing student achievement for every child. And with that, I would answer any questions that you might have tonight.
Very good. Go for it.
Yeah. So I guess for the for the action plans, who is it actually that's sitting down to write out that kind of plan? I know that you said the students, but is that actually something they do at home, or is it at school they get it checked off with their teacher?
It's a goal that they'll be setting with teachers who actually can help inform the conversation about specifically pinpointing what pieces, specifically if you go back to tools like the Learning Continuum, it really helps diagnose and identify what individual discrete skills students might be lacking.
And then, I guess for parents, is there anything that we sent out that would kind of just describe to them what they'll see and how?
Yep, they'll get a report
how to
that
read it,
looks
okay.
like this one 3 times a year.
Okay.
And what goes along with that is a link to a parent companion, basically notebook that's online that has about every tutorial a parent could ever imagine accessing. It's a little overwhelming, but sometimes if parents have time or that's something that they want to explore with their child, they will have all of the tools at their fingertips in order to be able to do that.
Can you send me the geometry link?
Yeah.
It also has links, nice thing about the parent component, it also has links to Khan Academy lessons that are linked to the individual needs of students. So if parents are struggling with, I don't know how to help my kid do
That's the big-
divide fractions, there's a Khan Academy link on there that says, here's a tutorial that might help you.
Awesome. Very cool.
So how does this change our teacher leadership kind of conversations? Or is this what will then drive kind of the instruction you're doing in classrooms? Or is this more of a way, I'm like, how does this fit into our other professional development, our TLC, all those things? Is it just a
tool.
measurement tool?
So this is a measurement tool, and we're
Okay.
not going to, we're not going to try to use it for purposes that it was not intended for.
Okay.
Obviously, if a teacher has questions about the curriculum or isn't sure how to use the reports, we certainly have lots of supports and able to help them, whether that's their building principal or their instructional coach in their building or curriculum specialist. They were some of the original trainees to help be able to support some of this work and went in first so that they kind of have that on-the-ground experience to help teachers feel a little bit more confident about using the reports and actually accessing them and putting them into practice.
So really, this is more of a
teacher-
discussion between the student, the teacher, and the parent, possibly, eventually.
At one level.
At one
It's
level.
also a discussion between a teacher and her colleagues, his or her colleagues.
Okay.
It's also a discussion between a building level principal and a group of teachers or individual teachers.
Depending on which level I'm down to.
That's correct. And the nice thing about MAP is it provides, like I showed, all of those different levels tell a little bit different piece of the story.
We feel like we have all the supports in place for staff to meet at each one of those levels, what they need to do to be effective and
I would say that the great piece, when I implemented this in a prior district, I started out K2 and then rolled it out 3-4. I rolled it out slowly. The teachers, as we put together the team, really liked the MAP assessment and the tool and the data and the feedback. But it's going to take us, the other teachers are going to be learning pretty much basic how to pull the reports in the training and begin to look at those and make sense of those. That's why the PLC work that they get to do in the buildings on early release day, they'll use this as part of the conversation. It's going to take a year for teachers to become really fluent in understanding all of the reports. It may take a second year for some, but the great piece is that it becomes a learning that happens not only in the school, but with our students and our parents as we begin to roll this out. But what I found in the prior district, it took us, in the K2, it took us almost 3 years before every teacher in the district felt very confident in their knowledge of MAP, because it is something that you're learning. There's what Dr. Borthman showed you tonight as far as reports. There's still many more reports that the teachers can access. He pulled out, there is so much to break it down and group students and help teachers understand what students need to learn to move to that next level. It's exciting, and once the Iowa assessment gets in and we have a couple of years under our belt, we'll have a large enough sample group that this can become a predictor for us on how our students, so we should know how our students are going to do before they even take the assessment. So it's some really great work that's going on with the MAP assessment, but we will have to be patient as our teachers learn this, because I want them to have a sense of urgency around learning it, but I don't want them to fear it. And they're going to have to almost, what I say, go to school. It's going to be a year of learning, but it's going to be a good year because they're going to have data they've never had before. And it's going to be great to see, because probably the second grade teacher, the Sutton, said, he's doing great. But when she saw this, she went, uh-oh, he's doing great, but he didn't make the progress he should have made. She would have never known that without this assessment, because the Iowa assessment at the end of the year does not tell you that. And so that's the shift we're making as a district. We're gonna begin to know our students and what they know and don't know and what progress they're making. And we had not had an assessment like this before. We waited till the end of the year and we found out how they did on the Iowa assessment. Plus, this is a great tool for our parents. I mean, for Dr. Vorthman now to know what his son needs to continue to achieve at that high level, powerful.
Yeah, it seems like a great, and then kind of offering like differentiated instruction and having the kids take some sort of accountability for that. Because I assume, especially younger kids seem pretty excited about the idea of where they're at and how they get there, because they love the Lexile and they love these things, and it gets to be a little sense of pride for them to move it
Very
up.
much
So
so.
that's, so are there any of the surrounding districts use anything like this?
There are other districts in Iowa, but there aren't any in our immediate backyard that use it. MAP is the state assessment in Nebraska, but it's a
Okay.
little bit different version of it.
Okay. This seems like a great tool for us, and kind of I think hopefully will become like a real boon for our kids that other districts won't
I
have.
appreciate Dr. Murillo pushing us to make sure that we were putting something in place where we had meaningful data points that we could track progress over time and be accountable for it. And like she said, it's gonna take us a little bit of time to be able to get the wheels rolling and get people comfortable, but be assured, she was guaranteed that we're going to have meaningful data points in the next 3 years.
Okay.
When I was at the college, there was a common saying that, that we were data rich and information poor. And this reporting is just so rich. It provides excellent information that people can act on. And I guess what one part of it that I'm really excited about is the parent aspect of it. I'm a parent of a second grader as well. And getting information is really difficult to do. There's not a whole lot of information to get that you can make sense of. So, we've talked a lot about getting parents to be our partners in this, and I think this gives a tool they can act on that parents really need to have, so.
And then is there a nice spot on our website for what this will do and how this will work? I'm just curious, engaging parents in that way. Because you're right, I mean, you love going to your parent-teacher conferences because you want to know all you can and how do you help your kid, and a lot of times that conversation is tough, even for them, because there just isn't a lot of info.
Yeah.
This is great.
Zoe's doing good. She's
Yeah, I know, doing real good, great
doing-
kid.
She's doing good.
Are the results
Right.
Yeah.
sent out
Feels like Moneyball.
electronically,
He's a great
Yeah.
hitter, big kid.
Yeah,
She's a
we
great-
actually have the ability to do both.
or- Okay,
Yes.
The electronic version is more interactive and allows you to kind of drop and
Right.
drag and see it and dig a little bit deeper.
right.
And then for like students that have like an IEP plan, would this kind of help gauging those goals so that there's a more specific area that they would
It
need
certainly
focus on?
could.
Yeah.
One of the things I failed to mention is this assessment is taken by all of our students. No one is exempted from this. So whether a student is new to the country or an English language learner or has a specific learning disability, we want to see if they're making growth as well.
Oh,
So
yeah.
when you see this data, it's not just a subset of kids or a select group of kids. This is all of our kids we're talking about here that fall in one of those bands.
And Bill would be very pleased to know that, and I am too as well, that this allows all our students the ability to have a plan. They can sit
Yeah.
down and map out a plan to how can I improve? What do I need to do? I mean, from a diagnostic standpoint, I can see where the teachers and will be able to dive down and say, wow, that one unit that we covered, all our students performed poorly there. Maybe we need to look at how we're administering that unit. What happened? Was Was it the weather? Was it, I mean, what can we look at? So from a diagnostic standpoint, it's by itself is amazing. I mean, just from the information you'll be able to gather.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Worthman.
I just have one question.
Oh,
As far
yeah.
as the goal, I know in your example, Sutton, it looked like he went with the projected RIT.
Mhm.
Will most students do that, or will they be allowed to lower the goal? Or if they can't lower, they will have to at least achieve that projected RIT?
That's right.
Okay.
So what happens is this is actually an interactive form. So if I go in here and I say, I only grew 1, but I only want my goal to be 2, it'll flag it and say,
Okay.
you're not on target. You're not gonna make growth.
Hmm.
Or if I put in 27, it'll flag it and say, that's not a realistic goal.
And is that based on where you're at, or is that based
That's
on
right.
averages?
No, it's based on
Where you-
it's based on your level. So Sutton was in winter, or in spring, he scored 202 in math. It knows that students like him who scored 202 in math, most of them made 6 points gain that next year. So it projects that that's how he should do the next time, based on how kids like him performed.
How awesome will this information be?
Oh, it'll tell you, I mean, it'll tell you if you're on track or you're not on track.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah. It's amazing that they can do this all the way down that low,
Right.
but they have indicators that they've researched. Pretty spot on.
All right.
Very good.
Well, as a
Thank you.
follow-up to that, I wanted to provide a quick update tonight on some of the progress that we've made on the academic 2017-2020 academic plan. Granted that we've had basically 6 months of implementation since we introduced it to you in December of 2017, but I did want to give you an update on kind of where we have been this year and where we're hoping to perform in the following upcoming school year. So if you recall, we put together at the end of the last calendar year an academic plan to really provide a roadmap that guides the work and looks at some common metrics for keeping us on track and on target on the academic side of the house as we work with teacher leaders and principals and building leadership teams. And so if you remember, we set 6 specific measurable goals around outcomes that we wanted to see in the next 3 years. And the first one was we looked at reading achievement in grades K through 3. And our goal was to get to 68% of students not needing additional support by 2019-20. And we made 1% increase. That we did not hit our goal of 4% increase this year. We started, if you remember, in 15-16, we were at 53. So we've gone from 53 to 57, made about 4 points growth in 2 years, but not enough to hit our target of 60%. This data point in the fall will be replaced with map data. So we don't want to be talking about using assessments for purposes other than which they were designed. This is one of them. We didn't have another good measure of dipsticking reading across the points in time during the school year, so we used the FAST. We will continue to administer it and use it for what it was intended for, a screener with a net that helps us catch kids before they fall. But this will start to come to you as the percentage of students who are performing at average, and high levels in math and reading. The same thing can be said for mathematics achievement. We made a little over 1% growth on Iowa assessments last year in mathematics. And we will also replace this indicator with MAP as well. So you'll be able to see the percentage of students that are scoring in the 3 I categories. If you remember Dr. Shudak's presentation on Iowa assessment, this falls in line with what we've seen over the last 10 years, that we basically make a little over 1% growth every single year. And as he and I arm wrestle about data and statistics, he reminds me that even though things have changed in the last 10 years, what hasn't changed in the last 10 years is student achievement continues to increase in this district and hasn't gone down. Poverty may have increased, mobility may have increased, but we're still trudging along. It might not be 4% a year, but even with everything going on, we're still making about 1% growth every single year. And so that's what we want to continue to see, is that upward trajectory over time. Goal 2 was around early childhood. Our goal was to get to 560 seats, which would represent about 75% of all the students who need high-quality preschool services. We got really close to this year. We had 407 out of 420 4-year-old preschool students. This I'm going to put a little asterisk next to, and it kind of has to go on hold for a little bit until we increase the capacity to house pre-K classrooms. We are near capacity with the 32 classrooms that we have right now. We would have to add more space in order for us to continue preschool enrollment increases. Goal 3, coming soon. Goal 3 is related to our desire to increase high-quality instruction in every classroom. And we've grappled for the better part of 6 months with identifying how we're going to measure this in a way that is systemic and credible. And a group of teachers and administrators and teacher leaders spent the bulk of this last school year really diving into a robust teacher evaluation system that is electronic and that is really meant to guide conversations around growth and support. And by the end of the school year, we will have our first set of benchmark data that shows us how teachers perform according to Charlotte Danielson's framework for effective instruction. And we will be able to pull out specific domains with regard to classroom instruction, assessment for learning, learning environment, and look across our school district and be able to benchmark how well are we doing in what's happening in the classroom, the practices that are happening in the classroom every day. So we'll be bringing you that data piece as soon as we are able to get that first benchmark data established with 1 year of calibration under our belts. Goal 4 was around social and emotional learning, and we're kind of in our infancy of this work. We were flat, and that's kind of what I expected to see this year. We had spent a lot of our time working on some other initiatives in our buildings, and this didn't rise to the level of hottest topic or biggest priority. Mrs. Smith has been working with the middle school and high school administration teams to really build some very systemic opportunities for social emotional learning within the advisement structure at 6 through 12. And so we absolutely intend to see this needle move next year. And we're hoping to get to 76% next year with our goal of getting to 80.
An example of that.
Yeah. So social emotional learning, if you remember, are the 5 big categories: self-efficacy, social awareness, responsible decision-making, et cetera, et cetera. And what we do is we ask students a research-based set of questions to reflect on themselves as a person and how they perceive themselves. Research tells us that how kids perceive themselves, how they metacognitively reflect, has a tremendous impact on how well they persist and achieve. And our goal is to get to 80% of our students saying that they have a positive social and emotional learning competency, that they feel efficacious, that they feel that they are able to make responsible decisions, they can interact well with other people. These are some of those, sometimes you hear them referred to as soft skills or non-cognitive skills. And we have a really good measure, but what we also have to do is have some really good universal instruction in place to help kids build skills in those areas. And that's why advisement is a perfect vehicle to do that. Goal 5 was really around our future ready work and making sure that students are ready for life after high school. 5.1 was to increase the number of students who have 2 pieces of paper, or a certificate, or a diploma program, or a 2-year degree. And we started out with the class of 2018 with 0, but we got 2. Yeah, that's awesome. We got 2. And for the class of 2019, our goal is 10, and we already got 2. So we got 8 more to go. We've got 8 enrolled right now at Iowa Western. I just met with Dr. Matthews this morning to do a progress check on how summer went. Summer went well. All 8 of them are ready to come back, plus 26 more in the fall. So we're feeling really excited about Early College Academy and the opportunities that it's providing for students that many of them never dreamed was possible at the beginning of last school year. Goal 5.2 is about allowing students an opportunity to earn a career credential while they're in high school through the NCRC tests. If you remember, those are the purple and silver cords that students wear at graduation. We got to 199 this year who earned bronze, silver, gold, or platinum, and we honored a record number of platinum this year at the school board meeting in late spring. We had kind of the worst case scenario happen with NCRC testing this year. We had all of our students gathered in both auditoriums on their Chromes, and the ACT server, not our server, ACT server went down, and none of our students were able to test. So I bribed them all with pizza and brought them back about a month later, and not all of them obviously came back. But we were able to get 199 of them through on the testing site. And we feel very confident that 288 is very attainable for next year. Goal 5.3 was looking at trying to get to at least 72% of our seniors graduating with some type of college credit under their belt, whether that's they've earned an AP credit because they scored 3 or higher, or they've taken a concurrent enrollment class on our campus or on Iowa Western's campus. And we exceeded our goal. We were hoping for 59% based on our trajectory, and we got to 63% of our seniors graduated with at least one class of college credit under their belt when they left our doors. So that's a great success story. Our last goal, Goal 6, is about post-secondary attainment and enrollment. Goal 6.1, we were shooting for by 2020 to have 60% of our students enrolling in some type of post-secondary education the fall after their senior year. Reported earlier to you that we're just shy of that at 51.4% for this year. We're hoping that when we see the next data come back on the 15th of August, that maybe we were able to get that nudged ahead with an extra 1 or 2 kids who came in after in the fall, after the fall semester. But we're on target. And then lastly, 6.2 is looking at the percentage of students who graduate within 6 years with some type of degree, whether that's a 2-year, a 4-year, professional degree. And as I brought you this last time, we were at 23%. We've got a few more graduates that came in the spring, and so we're up to 24% already. And when we get that in August, I anticipate that we'll have a few more that got through in the summer term. So we're well on target to meet that goal of 30% for the class of 2014. So that's kind of the snapshot of how we did in the last 6.5 months. I would welcome any questions that you might have about the academic plan.
Any questions from the board? Like you guys just been sitting around on your laurels, just hardly working at all, yeah. No questions, very impressive. I think very exciting, all the things that are going on, all the hard work you guys are doing, your teams are doing. You should be pretty proud of that.
Much attributed to Dr. Miller. She's pushing us in the right direction and giving us supports that we need and the accountability that we need to continue moving the needle. So, thank you.
Good deal. All right, thank you, Dr. Forthman.
Thank you, Dr. Borthman. Great presentation. At this time, for the informational presentations, I'd like to ask Ms. Ostrowski to join us. It's time for us to discuss our 2019 legislative priorities. And she's going to quickly summarize what we did in 2018 and then hope that we can come to a consensus on what we would like to move forward with in 2019. Did I say something wrong?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I need one of those lavalier mugs so I can just kind of roam around, but we'll be good from here. Appreciate the opportunity tonight to talk about legislative priorities. What I provided to you in the packet, I hope, was helpful to set the stage for a conversation. And what that was a lot of pages, more than 100 pages, of summary of what occurred during the last legislative session. And we're very fortunate to have partners at the Iowa Association of School Boards, the Urban Education Network of Iowa, and our Department of Ed, who compile that for us because they follow it and they analyze it more often than we have time to do. So hopefully that information was helpful, and I know we'll be referring back to that as we progress into the new legislative session come January. Thought I'd start with reminding you of what the priorities were that you adopted this last year, and that we tracked and monitored and had conversations with our legislators about. And that was 5 key areas of the sales tax for school infrastructure. And I know you all know that the House passed the measure, the bill overwhelmingly, and there was no action in the Senate. So we have no extension of SAVE at this point, but are hopeful for the future. On the topic of school funding for public schools, you might recall that there were multiple bills that addressed educational savings accounts and vouchers. Well, none of those passed out of the hearings at the committee level, so there was no action taken on that topic this year. For timely, equitable, and adequate school funding, as you know, fairly early in the legislative session compared to past years, so in March they set the 1%, so the timely was good, right? Equitable and adequate, we are in the middle of that 10-year process for equalizing the cost per pupil. And so while we didn't get any this year because we're above the average, pretty soon that increase will kick in for us. And the goal, of course, is to have every school district have the same cost per pupil. So not a lot of progress on that, but they're at least continuing their commitment to that. When we're talking about adequate school funding, we don't feel, I think as a district, that we have adequate funding for preschool, given that most of our children benefit the most from a full day of preschool, but yet we get paid for half. And so there was no action this year related to increasing the funding for students in preschool. And then on our perennial compulsory attendance age, and I'm looking at Mr. Kozier because we have had this on for many, many years, but really to no avail. And that was the concept of either increasing from 16 to 18 years, those required attendance ages for school. Last year we adapted it to be or till you obtain the proper credits, and I thought that was a good suggestion, but no action on that as well. Okay. So what we're doing to start the conversation tonight is to suggest 4 of the same and 1 new recommendation. And this will serve as an opportunity to kind of have that conversation. And then later in the board meeting, you're going to be asked to pass a resolution to set your 5 priorities. And so, Mr. Arthur, I'll let you lead the conversation on that. But again, we have the sales tax, protection of public school funding, that all-encompassing school funding category. I think we just try to fit it all in there because there's so many things they could be doing. That full funding for preschool, and then the new one is adequate funding for that next generation Iowa assessment that I understand is much more, according to Dr. Vortman, much more expensive to administer, as well as the required screener for English language learners, and that's the IELTS. And so with those required measurements comes a greater cost to the district. Now, the state did pass $2.7 million for the DE to help districts with that, but we don't yet know how that's going to be administered or whether that would even cover. There still seems to be a gap there and somewhat of an unfunded mandate. So with that, and that doesn't mean you couldn't offer others, but that's our best recommendation for you based on past conversations and based on unfinished business.
Any questions from the board? These priorities?
I don't have
That have been
a
recommended.
question per se, but I
Yeah.
just have a comment. If we've ever lobbied for funding for mental health in public schools,
Certainly should be,
and if it's something that we could consider
considering
As a
that it's
creative priority.
creatively
that
needed.
Needs to be addressed across the state and in our district, but
Correct. I'd be curious to even know how much is spent in total on the additional costs of providing care and support for kids who have mental health concerns.
right.
I think probably some of that gets lumped into SPED, and probably some gets lumped into into title accounts and other things, but reality is you may be providing services for kids who don't fall in either of those categories and need support.
Right.
Yeah. I think that was brought up last year, wasn't it, in ISB mental health? I can't remember what it was, but it's probably in that document.
I just think there was some note to mental health this year. Does anybody have the information on that?
Okay, I can look at that here.
They, this one isn't mental health, but one piece I think we shared and when we reported out in April was school districts are now required to conduct training annually on suicide awareness and prevention and intervention, as well as those recognizing those signs of toxic stress. And so at least, you know, again, it's not funded, but at least it's a push toward and a nod toward the importance of adults in schools having access to the right tools to protect kids, to help them if they need it.
You know, there was, looks like HF 2441, there was funding flexibility, and there was talking there about at-risk and dropout prevention funds expanded to include administrative staff, psychologists, social workers, mental health counselors working, that's adopted program students. Let's see. Let me see, so else today. Student mental health services was a part of provide access to mental health services for students and clarify funding sources and responsibilities. That was an action that had no, 2018, no action, no funding, including a continued delay of $10 million for high-need schools. That was originally set in the 2013 session. And no action on ELL property weightings. However, HF 241, that same one, so the school flexibility one seems to be the one where they're trying to lump in a lot of these. Fund mental health student supports through school foundation formula. Shared obligation across districts, or AEAs. Early childhood, human services, juvenile justice appropriations.
Well, I think their attempt is to give us some flexibility to use the funds we already have, but
Yeah.
I don't think I'm speaking
Not
out
new
of turn by
funds.
saying we don't have enough to do
Right.
all the at-risk services that we need to do anyway. So reallocating them toward mental health services specifically isn't necessarily taking us forward.
Yeah, I think you're right on there.
Is there anything to the strategy of seeking, and obviously seeking increased in state aid, but also seeking increases in funding for these categoricals? Coming off, you know, I don't know.
Good
So
question.
did you see that SF 2113, suicide awareness and prevention training for school
Here,
employees?
turn your mic on there.
That one is law now.
School board by July 1st, 2019 to require all school personnel who hold a license, certificate, authorization, or statement of recognition issued by the Board of Education examiners to annually have a 1-hour class of suicide prevention and post-prevention training.
That's certainly suicide prevention. Yes, sir.
Probably need to put that.
I mean,
There's just not
we,
funding for these.
we obviously need funding for these categoricals, but I guess if we're gonna make a priority to ask for, you know, an unfunded mandate like the state assessment, aren't there others that are bigger problems like special ed and other bigger budget items? I guess what is the cost of the
Dr. Worthman, do you
the
have an estimate
assessment
on
and
that?
the ELL screener?
That's his budget.
Looks like there's a lot of UEN stuff too on the student mental health services.
It's really, this is an unknown right now. The first one was that the status screener for ELL got passed on to us, and we didn't even know it was going to get passed on. They adopted a new assessment and then said, now you have to use both the screener and the progress monitoring tool from the state, which is about $12 a student. And every student has to be screened annually. So that was we weren't expecting that. And then our Title VI budget, which has typically we've used to pay for assessment, has basically gone to nothing. The state has taken most of those funds for other state purposes, but passed the bill on to us. We're worried about the state assessment because we know it's going to be more expensive. And right now we pay about $2 per student. We know that an assessment, there aren't $2 assessments around anymore. And it had always been kind of funded somewhat from the Department of Education's budget. when you look at the number of students who are in school in Iowa, $2.6 million is not going to
gonna
go
cover
very
nothing.
far. That's why we're concerned, and they haven't told us, and we're gonna have to, we know we're going to administer it in the spring. We have no idea how much to even think about budgeting for it.
At one time, Dr. Shudak had said that at a meeting, they mentioned $14.50
That's kind of what we had
for
heard.
online, and it would be cheaper if we kept our students on paper pencil. And I don't know how we can continue to be a state that's behind other states where we're still doing paper pencil. And the students would do constructive responses, which means that they will have to have them sent out to be scored. So instead of getting our results back in May and June, we're gonna be looking at August if we do paper pencil. So we are concerned about that, but I am also concerned about mental health. I think there's a lot of things that they wanna do. When I was talking with Lou and Dr. Tate from Davenport, we were discussing items that, and priorities for the next time the UEN superintendents meet. And we were talking about how many things are rolling out, but there's no way to know how they're going to fund them. So if they would have passed SAVE, would they have put in something for mental health or school safety? Because I still would like to see the state fund school safety at a greater rate than what they're doing now, which is you take it out of Pebble or you take it out of our SAVE fund when we're doing vestibules and different things, cameras and new entrants and visitor management systems. And so there's a lot of areas. I think that we talked about that being a priority because we just wanted to make sure that the state knew that we're watching them with what they do with the assessment.
Yeah.
Because this thing has been kind of almost out in the water, kicking around for at least 3 years, and it needs to be resolved. We need to have a state assessment that is consistent and that we can use from year to year to show that it demonstrate how our students are doing in our state. And, but I certainly also agree, mental health is a huge issue that every district throughout the U.S. is trying to figure out how do we, I think we made some good strides this year with our partnerships and our rubric that helps schools know what to do if something happens. But there's still so much more. If we had the funding, so much more.
I just keep getting reminded of the Jamie Vollmer list of things that gets passed on to schools to take care of for society. And, at every legislative coffee in the last couple of years, mental health has been a topic of high priority every year. I wonder if, but where do you allocate that money to address mental health in communities with so many human services providers, health and human services providers in every community? Does it make sense to say to the schools, help us solve this mental health issue? Yeah, we probably should be a partner, but I don't know, it's just, seems a little.
Yeah, the problem is when you took away mental health services within communities.
Right.
If you drive the streets, you walk around, you go to the stores, you're out in public in general, mental health is a need across our community. Some sort of support and services, so there's no funding for that. Throwing it back on us to be hopefully helping families to build a foundation with which their kid can grow well. I mean, I don't know what that costs, but it's got to be more than the cost of an assessment. And it's more than the $67 we got last year in increased state aid.
Right.
So, yeah, that's,
And if I may join in on the mental health, there is a suit that has a case that is pending forward to, in Compton, California. And they are bringing a case about mental health and trauma and what students are going through, and that the state is not funding the districts, and that the districts aren't responding to children's needs that have been through so much trauma and mental health. So the public is now, I feel like from this case that the public is really looking at the school to step up. But I agree with you, Mr. LaFurla. How much more do we add to the plate, you know?
Educator.
Yeah, as educators.
Yeah.
But it's something, a case that we definitely need to follow, because there is some lawyers, there's even videos on YouTube about it. So educators are really starting to check into what happens if that case moves to the Supreme Court and they win. What does that mean for every district across US?
Well, I think certainly we could probably add that as some sort of recommendation, Jill, if you start thinking about wording for later on. Any other discussion on this right now? All right. Move on to the technology report. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Fringer to the podium to present. He's going to speak to the technology report and then also talk with the board about the library and media report. Both of these reports, you know, were on last month agenda, but Mr. Fringer was held up in an airport, and I'm glad he made it back safely. And these are also requirements by the state that we present these reports. So, Mr. Fringer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I did enjoy my evening at Midway Airport. I was able to watch the YouTube live stream of the meeting until my flight boarded. So I knew about all the fun I was missing that evening. This is the Technology Department annual report to the board. And this had traditionally been done in February. And with the permission of the superintendent, we moved it to June because then we can give you a full year, a report on the year rather than a report on about a half a year. It also aligns better with our measurement tools. So that's why we moved to June. And then the travel difficulties are why I'm here tonight rather than in June. I was going to point out that agenda item C, right below the technology report, is the annual library report. There's a comprehensive report in your board packet. It is a state-required, there are state-required components in there. If there are questions at the end of this presentation, I'd be happy to answer those questions. So tonight, I've also provided you a very comprehensive report on the operations of the technology department in your board packet. Way too much to talk about in there. So what we've done is pick out something very, very important that we're working on to highlight with you tonight, and that is the Instructional Coach Technology Year 1 evaluation. About 2 years ago, Dr. Bruckner and Dr. Vorthman and I approached you about doing some shuffling of FTEs to put more horsepower in the technology coaching realm, and with some revised job descriptions and TLC, we were able to do that. We had 5.2 FTEs working this year as instructional coach technology. At the end of year 1, this is the evaluation of how it went. So we started off with program goals. First of all, to provide additional supports to teachers that facilitate implementation of the technology grade level expectations. That's jargony, technology grade level expectations. A GLE or grade level expectation is a common vernacular in schools because in our pacing guides and curriculum guides, the things we expect students to be able to know and do are called grade level expectations. When we created the technology grade level expectations, we didn't create a whole new framework. We created expectations that align with core curriculum. So those are embedded in math and language and science and social studies. They don't stand alone. They're embedded to help power the learning that is going to take place in our core instruction at all grade levels. And then obviously we want to encourage innovative practice that aligns with the building and district goals. So those are our 2 program goals that we've tried to evaluate. Also, a little over a year ago, we came to the board and presented our why statements. Our administrative team spent some time poring over, why all of this technology investment in our school district, and we came up with 4 very powerful why statements that we now align all of our work to in our technology department. The first one is powerful experiences. We want kids to have really meaningful, deep, powerful experiences in classrooms. The second one is purposeful connections. This is connecting to experts and audiences and authors and folks who are not inside the walls of our schools, connecting to the world outside for the purpose of fueling the learning that's going on in classrooms and creating rigor and relevance. Personalized learning. Not every student has interest in the same thing at the same time, giving the students the means to dive in deeper to things that really engage them. And finally, digital citizenship. We want our students to be good digital citizens. So those were our 4 why statements. With that came emphasis and work to make sure that these experiences are what we ensure for every student in every classroom in our school district. To go along with that, we came up with 9 standards, and those standards align directly to the why statements. These are those articulated 9 standards, and when I refer to GLEs or technology GLEs, this is them. Online collaboration. We're going to talk about connected experiences a little bit tonight as a goal going forward. So when I say technology GLE, I'm referring to these 9 things, specific things that we want kids to have as an experience. They're articulated all through our curriculum in language and math and science and social studies, not separately, but as a way to fuel instruction and learning. Just some examples. This is a Hoover first grade student practicing reading fluency using an app called Screencastify. These are 4th grade students at Edison Elementary creating multimedia presentations that showcase their understanding and knowledge of the Midwest region. These are high school students connecting, one of our keywords tonight, with Taylor Siebert, who's an expert. He's an industry expert. He works for a company called Class Intercom, and this conversation was about how to create a movement with social media, and this conversation occurred after the tragedy at the Florida shootings and the social media movement that was going on. It was that just-in-time teachable moment where they were talking about the use of social media to create a movement, which those students accomplished very well. This is a 7th grade classroom at Wilson collaborating and publishing their reading responses. This is a Hoover 4th grade classroom using Google Docs and visual writing prompts. This was the portable digitarium that was used at Wilson for students to explore space. It's a big plastic bubble. It is everything. This technology is not a computer. It's a legend. You know, I didn't get to go in. I would have loved to have, but essentially the students go inside and experience a planetarium, but right there at school. A very powerful experience. My favorite, some 5th grade students connected with a robotics company in Denmark. And this was done through one of our instructional coaches who had some connections through some people locally. What we learned as a surprise during this is she's demonstrating the use of a robot that is used for instruction in autism classrooms that we just happen to use in our district. That's Milo. That company in Denmark is the company that manufactures and programs Milo. So that was kind of accidental. It was a connection to a technology company, and by gosh, we use their product in our classrooms. This is an example of high school students using lots of digital tools to represent their scientific argument. And finally, some 6th grade students using Google Expeditions. And that looks like the old ViewMaster, but it really is a 3-dimensional virtual reality experience. These students, I found out later, were exploring Orion's Belt, a space experience. So they were in space, so to speak, virtually exploring Orion's Belt. So those are the kinds of things we want to see happening. Those are examples of things. But that's just anecdotal. Love seeing this stuff, but that's just anecdotal. And that is actually one way that we do measure instructional technology. It's that qualitative. Do we see high quality things happening? And do those activities and lessons and experiences align to our technology GLEs and our core curriculum? So that is the qualitative part. What do we see? What do we hear? What are we seeing on social media? Those types of things. Then there's a quantitative, how much, how often. We have a way to measure that. And then comparative. We compare ourselves to ourselves every year, and then to the schools in our AEA, to our state, and to nationally. So first of all, qualitative. That is the more subjective type of measurement. We use observations and teacher feedback, newsletters, storytelling, what we see, what we hear, classroom walkthroughs, that type of thing. And the questions we use for our qualitative analysis are, do the activities align to the district's why statements, tech GLEs, and articulated building goals and curriculum? we're not just doing this because it looks kind of fun. We're doing it because there's a learning purpose. The second question we asked ourselves is, do the things we observe align to the results we see in our clarity survey, which we'll talk about in a minute? And then are those observations reflective of best practice? Again, back to everything that's fun is not necessarily best practice in a classroom with technology. Then we go to quantitative, the least interesting part, but we do keep some tallies of our interactions with teachers. So the team, when they interact, engage with the teacher or a group of teachers, a PLC or a whole building, we tally that, just exactly like you see up there with the hash marks. The criteria to be included as a tally, the activity, whatever it is, must align to a technology GLE. It's not just something that we're doing. It involves co-planning or modeling or formal professional development. So lots and lots of conversations take place between our coaches and teachers, but for it to count as a tally, it has to involve something beyond just talking. Co-planning, modeling instruction, or formal professional development. And then it also has to be ongoing and have a documented outcome. Is there evidence that the teacher continued this practice? Did it make a difference academically? Those types of things. So we tally by tech GLE, our 9 tech GLEs, and these tallies add up to 410. We have 5.2 FTEs, so that's about 80 apiece, roughly. Interactions that met that hopefully rigor to be counted as a tally. And you'll see that it's differentiated by the type of activity that we are working with our teachers on. Some have very high numbers and others low numbers. Then the comparative analysis. This is the Bright Bites Technology and Learning Survey. We presented this data to you since 2013. It is a nationally normed survey given to hundreds of thousands of students nationwide. It is widely used in Iowa, and every single school district in our AEA uses this Bright Bites Clarity Survey. So it's really good, deep data, and it gives us something to compare to, and it also is a great way to set goals for the future. We also have the access to Karen Goldstein, who is an expert, and she works with us on analyzing the data, communicating with the principals and leaders, and then also goal setting. So that it is a very solid tool, much like the map that you heard about earlier in terms of the measure of academic progress. A very rigorous, good tool. So Bright Bites gives us all kinds of measurements. Your packet is full of numbers and measurements, and I'm going to pull a few out of here. Each year we get a CASE score, Classroom Access Skills Environment. We are 1098. I wish we were 1100 because that moves us to the next, to the next rung on the ladder. That's our near-term goal, is to get to 1100 as a composite score. But the exciting news is in the classroom. We have never been orange there. We've only been pink. Pink is the next level down. We've now moved into the proficient category in classroom. And I've told you for a number of years, that's where our emphasis is. We're trying to move the classroom needle. Access, we got lots of computers. And the green in skills indicates really good, skills for both teachers and students. And our environment, support, professional learning. Ironically, professional learning, that's the first time it's ever been orange too. It's always been pink. So those two, those two looks at those two needles are very encouraging. Our team was trying to move the classroom needle, and professional learning is how they did it. So to see those move, into the proficient area, it's very exciting for me.
I guess that's interesting because the teachers have these crazy skills
Yes. But
and great access, and we're coaching them on use, I'm guessing.
translating that into good instruction.
Yeah.
So, that's foundational. Access and skills are foundational, but really what we want to move is that classroom area. That's, for me, that's the one that's so important. Environment supports all of that too, but it's really the classroom. This slide is really just there for me to illustrate that 14 of 15 schools showed improvement this year. We've never done that either. We would be 9 of 15 or 8 of 15 or maybe 11 of 15, but 14 of 15 improved their composite score this year over last. Very impressive. Again, I'm attributing some of that to the work of the instructional coaches. I also have permission to move away because I'm mic'd as well. I wanted to point out some things on this slide which I made the best I could, but I don't think it's the best. The top line is the national scores. This is the composite scores, and then each of the domain scores nationally. Same for Iowa, same for our AEA. You'll notice as a school district, we score above the nation, above the AEA, and above the state of Iowa in all of those categories, which is great, proud of that. We also had an early start. We started this, back, in 2010, 11. We have some advantages there. This is good. I'm gonna temper my comments in a minute about how good it is, but it is good. It is good. We are above the nation, above the state, and above the AEA in all areas. Now, looking at schools specifically, nationally, 15 of 15 of our schools exceed the national. 14 of 15 exceed in classroom. That's what that means. 14 of 15 of our schools. So as you see, as you read across, in composite, 15 of 15 exceed the Iowa score as well, and 10 of 15 exceed the AEA score. That's how you read that chart. The reason I bring that up is to show that we are doing relatively well with some advantages of early start. This is all fine. Moving the scores is great in technology. We want to see it also reflected in the measure of academic progress and whatever our state test is. It's very important that this is not a standalone measure. It's a good measure, but it's not a standalone measure. It's one thing that indicates that we're doing some things right with technology specifically. I don't want to lose track of student learning in that classroom area. If we could leave the others the same and move that classroom way up, you will see the rest of it follow. I believe that. I picked out just a couple of data points. There's hundreds of data points in the Clarity Survey. This one is a custom question that we asked them to include. Because of the work I've done with the technology coach, I've tried something in my classroom that I would have otherwise not tried. 54% of our teachers responded affirmative or yes to that. If you go back and you remember that number of 410, 54% of our teachers would be, 450 or something like that. I mean, the number aligns. It makes sense. It shows that our tallies match the data in this survey as well. And to be honest, with 5.2 people to have roughly 400 teachers reply in the affirmative, that's a lot of contact by a few people, and it's only yes or no. So we're very pleased with this answer. That was a way bigger effect than we expected. Oops, I went the wrong way. So goal setting specifically, there are many, many targets, lots of data in the Clarity Survey, and we do lots of different kinds of goal setting. I'm going to give you an example of one. We meet with building principals, and we also focus on building goals and things that might be in the building improvement plan and schools that are trying to move the needle on something else where technology might help. But goal setting, for example, we saw this stick out, and it's related to the technology GLEs 1 and 4. Students are asked to collaborate online with students at other schools. Not that hard. Yet 61% of our students say they never do that. That said to our team, what? How can this be? So we're going to focus on it next year. You're not going to see 61 there. You're going to see that is going to be much lower. And, it's not expected that it happens weekly. Monthly and every few months, these are going to go up, and this one's going to go down. And if that doesn't happen, we haven't been successful. So those are the kind of data elements we pull out of Clarity. We identify this based on our GLEs, not what somebody else is telling us. And then we identify a clear goal. We will articulate a number when we meet here this fall, and we will go after it. And I will let you know next June how we did on that. That's how our goal setting works, with many different metrics that we would look at inside of Clarity. So, conclusions. We think we are providing additional support to teachers, and we're focused definitely on grade level expectations, no doubt about that. And we think that we are helping to encourage innovative practice. Data suggests that we can and need to move the needle, and that was just one example of our GLEs measured by the Clarity Survey in a place where we think we can make a difference. And we understand that each building is unique and principals have different goals for their buildings, and our technology coaches help identify strategies that are also going to help move some of those building-specific goals forward as well. I believe you remember that, you know, our 5.2 FTEs were reduced to 4.2 FTEs. And that was strategic, and we're not backing away from our goals. We're gonna do our best with our 4.2, and look forward to coming back next year and reporting some good gains, and I hope over 1,100 in composite, and we continue to grow in the classroom. So with that, any questions?
Any questions? I guess I have some questions. So if you go back maybe 3-4 slides, the 10 of 15 schools that don't exceed, right there. Was that expected, surprised? I mean, are we surprised by these or no?
I was surprised when 15 of 15 of our schools exceeded national and Iowa scores on the composite. That
Right.
was a little bit of a surprise. I would have expected, 13, 12, 11, something like that.
Right.
It does show that we have some consistency of program across the district. But I also think that our early start, which was great, I'm glad we had an early start and have some advantages in this. School districts are catching us. You know, the AEA, for example, having only 10 of 15 of our schools exceed the AEA average. We are, of course, the largest school district, and we have some of the biggest challenges of any of the school districts in our AEA. There's some, we work closely with Essex schools. They're going 1-to-1, and they bought 125 computers this year, which is awesome for them. But
I would assume if I'm a small school district, I use technology to bridge the gap on what I teach
Right.
in the classroom, what experiences my kids have, probably at a greater rate than a big district does, or no?
yes,
I mean,
yes,
as a way to be competitive.
right.
The teaching, I guess, what is it that you need from us, I guess, as a board, to move that needle dramatically in the classroom?
I think two things would help us a lot, and one of them we've talked a lot about tonight, and it's resources. I wish I had 5.2 or 6.2 or 7.2, and the .2 is an AEA person, by the way, that works here 1 day a week as part of our agreement with the AEA. I wish we had, a little bit more human horsepower, but understanding the constraints of state financing, it's to be very, very difficult to expand that way, unless something is done at the legislative level that allows that. The second thing that I think we need to do, and so much investment has been made by the teaching and learning department in technology tools. We're adopting a math curriculum in 612 that we need these computers for. The continued predictable funding of the replacement cycle, and support of the support, the staff that I have, not asking for more folks, but I need to maintain the team that I have on the support side in order to be able to keep all of this running. We have, essentially 7 people that take care of 10,000 computers, so it's, I don't know what I would do with one less in that particular area. So,
Gotcha.
and then the continued philosophical support that, technology can be an accelerator of learning, but it is not we don't lead with technology.
Right.
We lead with excellent classroom instruction. We don't lead with
That's what I was
technology.
gonna
This is
ask, I
just one
guess.
more thing we put in the teacher's toolbox to make them as best as they can in the classroom.
From where we are now, does dramatic growth in this change really what we're doing in the classroom much? Or is it just that additional tool, that additional resource?
I think the classroom domain specifically related to the 4 Cs, especially collaboration and communication, that can make a really big difference for our kids. I also think as more and more online assessments, our new state test, I'm sure will be an online assessment. As students become more and more familiar with online testing, we'll be more prepared than districts who are, not ready to do that. It'll, I think the first time it hurts, you know, this new assessment on the computer, I think the computer hurts because students are used to a different way, bubbles. But I think it won't take long because these devices have been in their hands for a long time. They're comfortable using them, so.
Sure. Okay. Any questions? All right, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Now we move on to the resolution portion of the meeting. We have approval of our legislative priorities. There are some suggested priority areas
We typed them up
here.
for you guys.
Ooh, okay. Here are some suggested priorities. And there's a little one at the bottom there. Would someone like to make a motion for what suggested priorities for the next legislative session should be?
So are we going with the 5 dots or the bottom ones?
I think you just make whatever you would like to make in your heart.
Yeah, it can be any 5, 3, 4. It's
2, 6,
2,
1,
6.
14.
Yes, and please feel free to change any wording around the mental health supports. We just tried to, Diane.
Awesome.
Great job for getting.
I move that we adopt the following 6 legislative priorities. First being state sales tax for school infrastructure. Second, protection of school funding for public schools. Third, timely, equitable, and adequate school funding. Fourth, full funding for statewide voluntary preschool. Fifth, adequate funding for next generation state assessment and screener for English learners. And finally, our 6th legislative priority, funding to provide mental health supports for students.
Excellent, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, sir. Any discussion on this? I do like, I assume we would run with the same language that is in the packet, kind of, I can't see it now. Anyway, there's language in there. Dean always throws that up right in the middle. No. Yeah, if you could, you?
I think he's using it as a weapon.
I just want to, the tab button just makes a noise. So one, just saying, let the sunset on statewide 1 cent sales. And there's a whole bunch of other information there. Maintain public funds for public education. Educational savings accounts will dilute available funds and create further erosion of equitable funding for Iowa's public school charter. I have not heard much on this discussion in this past couple months. Did see just a damning report on charter schools that had come out that was crazy how few of them are actually diverse in their somewhat heavily diverse neighborhoods. But establishing timely and adequate school supplemental assistance, developing methods to provide additional support for children from poverty, maintaining statewide voluntary universal access to preschool for 4-year-olds, providing full weighting, as Mrs. Strusky had said, providing adequate funding to support the cost of the added assessment, which is more expensive to administer, and then I would think providing adequate funding for the increased cost for mental health support services for our students, given all that we have to provide. Any discussion on these?
When we look at what affects all districts, now some districts have higher funding, higher requirements for busing. They have higher requirements for English learners. But I don't think there is going to be a district that is in the state of Iowa that is immune from mental health issues. I mean, I think when we look at, preschool, when we look at preschool, some of the smaller districts, they say, we don't need to worry about it. We've got enough local providers of high-quality preschools that we can get by with that. But when we look at mental health, that is required. I don't think there will be any district in the state of Iowa that is immune from the expenses and the challenges that arise from students with mental health, not just students, but families that have mental health issues. So I think this is one of the things that can help from my perspective as a delegate in the past. This is one issue that can help draw large and small districts together. No different than the assessments, cost of the assessments. If it's going to be statewide, everybody's going to have to deal with it. So there's always the challenge and the difficulty of bridging between large and small school districts. So, and I think when we look at what we can do as leaders in our community, is we need to be leading with mental health because very few people are immune from the challenges that arise out of mental health. So I'm glad that we're looking at adding that to our list of priorities for our legislative agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Kozar.
Any other discussion? All right, Dean, please call the roll.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
and Mr. Arthur.
Yes, and the legislative priorities are approved. Now we have approval of substitute teacher and substitute para rates for 2018-2019. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the substitute teacher and para rates for the 2018-19 school year as presented.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, sir. Any discussion?
I guess, so my first question is, do we have difficulty filling all of those spots generally?
I'm going to ask Mr. Milborn has done a lot of research on this for us, so I'm going to ask him to join us and assist me in answering the questions, because we do have some areas that we really struggle to have subs.
Could you repeat the specific question, please?
Okay. Yeah, no, I guess this was just pretty general, as if we struggled to fill any of these positions, like either substitute teachers or the paras.
We do struggle on a weekly basis to fill all of our substitute positions, and that's one of the reasons we decided to try to increase the substitute pay to be more competitive in the metro area.
Do we have a number? I'm just curious on the, like our sub-paras. How many of those do we utilize on a daily basis? Are they pretty full-time, or what's?
So as a district, we've tried to prioritize our specialized programs and our specialized preschool programs. So we always try to fill those with substitute paras first, and then anything that's left over from that pool, if a regular para or regular special ed para position is not filled, then we try to fill those. So
Okay.
depending on availability in the week, that number will fluctuate. But we try to prioritize those high-need students, those students with high needs in those programs first always.
Okay. And so we're looking at increasing teacher rate to 150 per day. I assume is a competitive, to be competitive with the surrounding districts. And then on the changing the language on the 10 consecutive days, was it longer before? It was 16 days?
16 before.
Okay.
And we find with some of those long-term positions such as maternity leaves, which we know we have plenty of those every single year, a recruiting tool is, and something that those long-term substitutes value greatly, is having that pay increase a little bit the longer they're there. They have to take over lesson planning, they have to start attending
Sure.
PLCs, things like that. And so a recruitment tool would be to shorten that to try to attract more substitutes to cover those long-term situations.
Okay. And is the sub-para rate, I didn't see any information on that, is that competitive? That's a little, how much is that an hour, $11? Just curious.
88.
What's that?
Says 88.
88 per day, so it's like 11 an hour, or what is that?
Oh,
Just curious, is that just a flat 88 and they work from whatever time to whatever time?
Yeah, there's a balance. There's two things there. One thing is we just started.
1850.
We started the idea of sub-pairs just recently,
Mhm.
due to those high-need programs. And so we haven't researched a lot of that. A lot of districts do not do that in the surrounding areas. I would say we're pretty unique there. And
Okay.
then we also wanted to get that rate at a place where it's fair, but it's not undermining our full-time paras and their pay. So we wanted to just kind of have a good balance there of a fair pay, but still honor our full-time paras that come to work every single day and work with us.
Okay. And I assume there probably, if you had a need for a para that extended beyond 10 days, we'd probably be saying to them, hey, why don't you just come and be a para with us? Yeah, okay,
Oftentimes that turns into
Yeah.
a long-term position.
okay.
And Mr. Milborn, also our paras are eligible to have benefits, which in other districts, they are not. So that's another really, really nice benefit to those that elect to be a para for us. And the reason that we worry so much about the high-need programs, we're out of ratio, we're out of compliance if we don't have a para show up in preschool or a high-need student, yeah.
Yeah, really critical. Okay.
And then can you tell me is there a difference in requirement for the sub-para versus the substitute teacher? Is it the same course, or what would be a sub-para for that?
Yeah, so to be a sub teacher, you have to have a certain amount of education, or you have to get a sub authorization. And for a para,
An associate's?
what is it? Active background check, excuse me.
So it does not require the certain,
Certification.
yeah.
Threshold is not as high.
Yeah, I think the sub-teacher has to have a bachelor's usually, correct, or no?
No, just so
Yeah, I'm
many
looking at
hours.
Nebraska's thing, okay, so many hours. Sub-license, okay,
License or an authorization, there's kind of two tiers there.
okay. Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Oh, Thank you, sir.
Yeah, one of the things that when Mr. Milborn spoke to me about this, I want to make sure that we're competitive with the metro, because we don't want them to stay on that side of the river and not come over and work with us. And so that's why we're trying to get a little edge here.
Gotcha,
Strategic.
gotcha.
Can we, if they have like a Nebraska para thing, is that completely different, right, than the Iowa one? So they would have to do both, correct? Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. All right, any further discussion, guys, ladies? All right, Mr. Wilson?
Mr. LaFurla,
yes.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur.
Yes, the substitute teacher and substitute para rates for 18-19 are approved. Now we have a special election on 9/11/2018 for approval of general obligation bond to look at the, basically an issuance of 37 million general obligation school bonds per the petition here. And I guess I can maybe read this to you folks so you know what you'd be saying. Basically, they're petitioning the Board of Directors to contract indebtedness and issue general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed 37 million to provide funds to renovate, remodel, improve, furnish, and equip the existing middle school buildings, including site improvements, and to acquire, renovate, remodel, improve, furnish, and equip a relocation facility in that interim. And there are sufficient number here. Is there a motion?
Move to approve a special election on the issuance of $37 million general obligation school bonds on September 11th, 2018.
Thank you, Jill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, sir. Any discussion on this measure? Okay. All righty. I know Mr. Wilson went through these with a fine-tooth comb, I heard, so I'm sure they're all good. Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes. And the motion for the approval of this special election for the GO bond is approved. Let me click that sucker. Awesome. And now I have approval of a renewal contract with VODAC. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the contract with VODEC for the 2018-19 and the 2019-20 school years as presented.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, ma'am. Any discussion on this? The agreement and the rate sheet are in the packet. No discussion. Everybody's good. Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes, and the agreement with VODAC is approved. Now we have approval of, in a memorandum of understanding with Children's Square. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the MOU with Children's Square USA for the 2018-19 school year as presented.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Minshaw. Any discussion on this? None. Okay. Mr. Wilson?
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes, and the MOU with Children's Square is approved. Now we have approval of proposal with 4 Point Education Partners for Executive Cabinet Professional Development and Coaching. Is there a motion?
Move that we approve the proposal with 4 Points Education Partners as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, ma'am. Any discussion on this? Might ask Dr. Murillo just to talk about this and the impact it has on our team.
Sure. And Dr. Worthman has also a key role in this, and you're welcome to join me at any time you'd like. When I got here, of course, after I did kind of an assessment on the cabinet, and I also met with the cabinet, one of the things that I did here was they were seeking mentors. They were seeking someone that had done the work to work with them to make them better at what they do. Mr. Gehring, or Dr. Gehring, he has worked with many school districts around the U.S., and he has worked primarily around the area of helping a cabinet become a better team. And in fact, we're with him tomorrow all day at Iowa Western campus. And then also with helping principal supervisors really dig into the work and what does that look like? How do they support our principals that are on the front line with their teachers and really developing that kind of culture and helping principals make really good decisions around teaching and learning, around managing their building. And they've spent a couple of days, and Dr. Worthman, if you'd like to talk about the work, because we joined them for lunch one day. And so I really believe that for our next level, that we need some additional support in growing our cabinet members to that next level. As I've stated before, Dr. Worthman's team is really, really, really smart around best practices, learning from really good practitioners that have done some good research around teaching and learning. And so the next step, Ms. Smith, who has done some wonderful work at the elementary level as a principal and as a principal leader, is now shifted to a secondary principal supervisor. And so it's now putting that partner with her that can help her really think and begin to really ask good questions and learning how to support our secondary principals. Dr. Worthman, if you want to add some to that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we're asking for item G, approval for principal coaching and supervision here in a minute, is we're really trying to shift the role that our director of elementary and director of secondary play from one of basically in the weeds with curriculum work and putting out fires to one of really capacity building in our principalships. So what we're trying to do is help leverage the work that Steve has done nationally, really, in Chicago, in Hillsborough County, in Tampa, actually in Omaha Public Schools, as building those two important administrators as coaches, so that they can help build principals, build support and accountability for the principalship. The principalship is a very lonely place. And oftentimes, the only feedback that principals get is when things aren't going well. And what we want to be able to do is provide the necessary supports for all of our principals so that they can move the academic needle. And the specific strategies that Steve and the wealth of knowledge that he brings, I think will help propel us in the principal coaching role to that next level. He has a proven track record of doing it in other systems, and when we looked around at who we could identify, our paths had crossed about 3 years ago, accidentally, and when Dr. Murillo came, we had a common person. She was aware of Steve's work. We had worked a little bit with him over in the 3L, Leaders Leading Leaders Network in Omaha that we belong to, and it seemed like a good time for us to start to kind of push ourselves to take that next step.
And I think the one piece, as you heard Dr. Worthman talk about accountability, and the one thing that I've heard from the board is you want the academic needle to move. I've heard that loud and clear. And what I want to say is that I've got to create a sense of urgency, but I do not want to create a sense of fear in our district. And so in doing that, I think the best piece that we can do is partner with someone that's worked with a lot of districts to help us be really smart about how to do the work, to work smart without creating a sense of fear that as a building principal, if I don't move that needle, what happens to me? And that's why MAP is so important to us, because it measures also growth besides that high performer. And so we really are in a space because for a while, accountability and really setting goals and having a means to hit those goals and to have some time to reflect on where you are in moving your building. There hasn't been a lot of data points for principals to really, be able to use. And so as we're shifting and making that shift in this district to that, we want to make sure that we do it in the right way and not in a punitive way, but in a growth way. And so I believe that Steve brings that expertise, and he will even visit buildings with Julie and Mark. He will observe them as they are coaching principals and give them feedback. So there will be a lot of layers to this. The work that he does with the cabinet, I also need a think partner. Plus I also, besides just Julie, Mark, and Corey, there's other members to the cabinet that he's going to help them really kind of take on that role of also supporting the academic work. What do they do? What role do they play? Also, it's not that Mr. Wilson gets to be the CFO and he's not, a part of the district and the team. He's in there with us and moving that academic needle. And so really just keeping us all together. Mr. Hamilton, you can see how Mr. Bringer has really embraced and knowing that he wants to play a major role in that. And so that's the reason that we have the contract coming up with Mr. Gehring.
Okay. All right, any questions from the board? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
All right. Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
and Mr. Arthur.
Yes. And the approval for 4-point education to do developmental coaching with the executive cabinet is passed, and certainly that is what we asked for, moving the needle. So now we have approval of contract for the same consulting for principal coaching and supervision. Is there a motion?
Move approval of the contract with 4-point Educational Partners for consulting services for 2018-19 school year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, sir. Now, this one is obviously a little pricier,
Yes, this is,
but
yeah,
more intensive, I'm guessing,
that's correct.
by far.
This one is the one that works with Dr. Vorthman's side of the house,
Mhm.
and he will be meeting with every principal, and he'll be working with Mark and Julie and shadowing them as they work with principals, also helping us with principal meetings. So it will be a larger scope of work where every building principal will get touch points.
So would this be the same person working with the executive cabinet as well as the principals, so that they're actually, okay.
Yes.
I won't-
Yes. We want it, we call it a tight thread line, is what we are trying to really get in place. And that's a tight line between what happens at the school all the way to the focus of the cabinet. And we want that thread line to be represented in all the work that we do that we constantly come back to, student achievement.
So it looks like they would be regularly with us in our schools in here for the next year.
Yes.
Correct. Do we have, I'm not trying to be any naysayer, but do we have a thing where we say, okay, yes, this was successful? Or is it just in the general discussions we have daily, the direction of the district, the improvement in scores? What's that? How do we quantify this, down the road?
Well, one of the things that we've used to start our direction was our survey and our data. By using that, we could clearly see that our teachers were telling us that they were not receiving effective feedback. And from that, we began to craft that district focus on effective feedback and what that looks like from principal to teacher, teacher to teacher in our PLCs, teachers to students, and students to students. Steve's work really helped us craft what that could look like in year 1 and year 2. We'll have benchmarks to see if we're moving forward or not. I think also in the coaching that kind of evaluations that Julie and Mark do on the work that they have with Steve. And then I certainly know that we'll be able to see if there's any motion or movement from how principals and their feedback to us on how effective the work is.
Along the way, will the board get some regular feedback on
Okay.
just how this process is going and how it's changing the discussions we're having?
Yes,
Um,
yeah,
Okay.
because that was the key piece when we had lunch with them, because they were defining the role of a principal supervisor. Even though you guys have had a similar role in this district, it's never been defined. What do they do? And so it needs to be clear for principals. It needs to be clear for me, because not only are we going to hold principals accountable for moving the needle, I'm holding Dr. Vorthman accountable, who's holding, Ms. Smith and Mr. Mark Schultz. And so there's an accountability system that comes all the way up. The board holds me accountable, and so we're all in this boat together. And so in that, it's how do, again, I come back to, as we make this shift, which we've never had a tight thread line before, urgency for quality instruction, assisting and supporting our students, good conversation, principal support for classroom teachers, district level support for our principals, and then, but doing that with a sense of urgency, not fear. That's the key. And that, the only way you can do that is to be really confident in your coaching ability. And that is something we place Ms. Smith and Mark in. As Julie and Mark begin the work, there was no training for them. We placed them in this role. We've added NWEA. How does this all fit together? If we haven't thought that through at the central office level, how will our buildings be able to do that? We've got to provide, I sometimes say it's like a coach saying, end of the season, when you come back next year, you're gonna run this offense, and they walk away, and when they come back the next year, no one's taught them how to run the offense, but we expect them all to know. Our teachers go home for the summer. When they come back, we have to be prepared. So that's some really good work that's been going on there.
Okay, very good.
Okay. And then I just have a couple questions here. So, I know it says the principal would, at like the high school, middle school, would that also touch on like all the vice principals that would also be working with them? Okay.
Yes, they are in the meetings with us also. Yes.
And then, I just know that we had a fair amount of change throughout the buildings. Like this last time, would this be something that, stays through?
Well, yeah, you always want stability. Stability is great, and really, there was some change that I couldn't control. And then there's some change when an employee seeks a new position because they want to grow. I think it's up to us to allow them to grow. So stability is what we would love to have, yes. Can I promise you there'll be no changes? No. But I can promise you, we're going to support them, and hopefully they'll believe this is a great place to be a leader, and they'll want to stay.
Yeah, and I would assume this is going to give us the ability, for the first time in forever, to systemically coach our people on how to do their job well, and how to be an effective mentor, and how to be an effective, coach in their own building, and that's something that we've lacked, and almost probably some of the misinformation or miscommunications we've had as a district over time, probably been driven around the fact that we aren't always sure of how to relay a message, or how to put something
I
out in the
think
building and
that-
drive the building forward.
That gap exists in every industry.
Every
You know,
industry,
you
yeah.
take the person that's great at their job and say, you should
Yeah.
lead this department.
Yep.
And then you don't train them on how to be a leader and coach
pretty
and
common.
develop people.
Or don't support them.
Or, right. So, yeah.
I almost
this is
think that
very
might be us
needed.
being proactive on actually supporting our people. It's a great thing if we do it right, so.
Yeah.
And we have good principals in our district, just like we have great teachers, but they're young. And we need to support, especially our elementary principals are young, and they need this support, because we're gonna make them great leaders.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah,
I just had one question. So the 8 monthly sessions, that will be individual, 8 monthly sessions with each principal, one-on-one?
It's, yeah, you'll have to, I think he comes and does actual meetings with us, but.
So actually, what is in item G is 8 individual coaching sessions with Mark and Julie, with them going out together, meeting individually together, and then doing walkthroughs in buildings together. And then what comes underneath of that is another opportunity where Steve works with myself, Dr. Murillo, and Mark and Julie, where we calibrate what we're seeing to be able to adjust and figure out what we need to do more of, what we need to do less of, where are our deficits, where are our celebrations. And so I believe if he is on site, 16 days throughout the next school year.
But then we do online, we do.
Correct. There's also
Lots of
virtual
calls and-
coaching opportunities as well. He does planning with them pre and post, follow-up from each of their meetings, provides them individual feedback when he goes out and watches them coach and visits the buildings with them. And that also includes all of his travel, all of his expenses for every time that he's here. So,
are there also materials he's providing, things like that, that are inclusive in this?
yep, all the materials, everything.
Very good. Yeah, I kind of wish my work did this, just saying.
Steve's a good guy.
Or any further discussion? All right, Mr. Wilson?
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur.
Yes. And the approval of that full contract with 4 Point Education Partners is approved. Now I have approval of contract with BVH Architecture for drawings related to the middle school renovations. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the contract with BVH Architecture for schematic drawings related to the middle school renovations.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on these? And there's none? Alrighty, Mr. Wilson?
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur.
Yes, and the contract with PVH Architecture is approved. Now I move on to our consent agenda. There are a couple items, School Resource Officer Program Agreement, the Personnel Agenda, Purchasing Card Transactions and Checks, ACH, and Payments. Any discussion? Or sorry, is there a motion? Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I
sorry.
move approval of our consent agenda.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, sir. Now, is there any discussion on this? All right, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Kazire,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur.
Yes, and the consent agenda is approved. And the board workshop development is being reallocated towards August, which is excellent. And with that, we're adjourned.
Yeah.
Harry's gonna come in and